BJ Cole here, performance therapist and coach at Altis. And what we're going to talk about today is the types of treatment that people get around competition and around training sessions. I often get asked as a therapist and past athlete, what types of things work well around a training session and also around a competition. So we're going to talk a little bit about the styles of treatment that might be used in both those circumstances. So I've got here strength coach Jason Hetler. He's going to be my model for today. And there's a couple of things that really need to be considered when thinking about what sort of treatment you're going to get in a particular day. So we're going to pretend that Jason's got a competition coming up today. And what we need to consider first of all is the individual response to the type of treatment. So we've got to be sure that we know what we want to do with the treatment and have that intention throughout the decision-making process on what we look at and how we treat. So because Jason's got a competition today, I know that I can't do anything that's going to be too heavy, and we want to have something that's going to have him feeling good getting off the table and feeling sort of loose and able to perform well and have good range of motion and good function throughout the movement. So we're going to assume that I've done an assessment on Jason, and basically we're looking at his hips. He's got very tight hips, and that's what we sort of want to look at today. Now, because he's competing today, we've got to remember that the amount of time that he spends on the table is an important factor on his response. Every time we put our hands on an athlete, they get a response. So what we do to the athlete on the table is really important as far as what we're trying to get out of the treatment. A lot of athletes and coaches ask about getting massage before a competition or before treatment. So in my experience, anything too heavy as far as treatment goes, really heavy deep fascial work or deep tissue work should be avoided on a day of competition. Again, as I said before, the individual response is really important. So some athletes do like heavy work, but for the most part, and you can probably assume as a generalization that working really heavily is not going to be as beneficial to the athlete on something like competition day. So if I'm, say, trying to get some increased range of motion through the hip, we've tested Jason, we've found that his hip flexion is quite restricted. We want to sort of work through that. Now, having him in the same position for a long period of time will also dull his nervous system. So we don't want to have too much of an effect in that sense on his body. So a lot of the treatments that we do, trackside therapy here at Altis, relate to a treatment called ART, active release technique. And we find it's a good way of getting the athlete through range of motion, but also still getting a tissue response that's not going to lag into their performance. So if I've identified that I want to work some of his hip extensors that are going to give him some more hip range, I might put him in the position that we want to increase range and work through that in a sort of dynamic sort of sense. So say if I'm working through adductor magnus, I'd be putting some pressure on through the back of the adductor and then working the hip through range, slowly with movement, feeling restrictions and then working through them. So this dynamic nature of treatment gives the athlete some context to where you're trying to get with that extra range of motion. Post-treatment is another consideration as well, post-competition or post-training. This is where you might sort of instill some of your more traditional approaches to massage. So say, again, if we were trying to work through the same muscle group, I'd have Jason on his stomach, And this is where you can spend some more time doing slower techniques. You don't have to have them moving around quite as much. You might be doing sort of more I guess, Swedish massage techniques where you're doing sort of flowing movement. You're working through the tissue, the whole tissue. You might not have as specific an approach to a range of motion or whatever you're trying to get. It's more about just getting some movement through the tissue and working through the whole body. So another type of treatment is trigger point therapy, and I think this is a really important one to mention for pre and post competition or training. If you're doing a hold on a certain muscle belly and you're putting a lot of pressure, keep in mind that this is going to again have a very sympathetic nervous response from the athlete most of the time. Now, if you're talking about just before a competition, if I'm sitting here and doing a long trigger point hold through adductor magnus, it does cause a lot of pain if you are on a trigger point, and it also causes a response from the athlete to to dull their nervous system down. So it's the one thing that you probably should avoid is long sustained holds, and as I said before, deep pressured work through the area, through the tissue. So basically, you want to make sure that the athlete's moving well and moving a lot before a competition, before a session, and the deeper work and the more general work can be done after a session and after a competition. That's more your recovery type massage. So that's about it for today. Just make sure that the athlete knows what you're doing, and also you can use your training sessions throughout the week as basically a little bit of a tester. As I said before, every athlete does respond differently to the types of treatments they do. So when you do things in training, you can predict what they might do in competition, and know that that's a conversation you have and an agreement you have with your athlete and the coach as well. Make sure the coach is involved with those discussions, and then you can get the best out of the athlete on the day for your competitions as well as training. Okay, signing out.